There are many different kinds of horror, but potentially the scariest is psychological horror, the kind that tricks your mind. So what if I made a horror game that could read your mind? Well, that's exactly what I did, and the results were terrifying. This dark, depressing tale began last summer while I was camping in the Ozarks with my family. My brother had the idea for a game where there are imaginary monsters in your head, and the more scared you are, the bigger the monsters get, and the more there are. I thought it was an interesting idea, so when I got home, I opened my computer to work on it and was met with the blue screen of death. After I returned from the hospital, I logged on and thankfully found that nothing was messed up, except my sense of humor, so I started working. The first thing I did was create basic player movement and gave the player a flashlight. I also made this slight glow around the player. I then began creating animated monsters. I really liked them, and my brother despised them. Well, he didn't really, but he said that the point was for them to be these massive, shapeless things, and I had created emaciated endermen. Having been sent back to the drawing board, I decided to make something horrible, something sinister, something disgusting. I modeled it after my cat Smudge. So I created this pulsing blob, and I mashed a bunch of them together. I then drew a few different teeth, eyes, and tentacles. It was now time to begin the spawning. To code the procedural monster generation, I started by adding a bunch of points around the monster's body, if you can call it that. I used the teeth to create two different mouth types. I was then possessed by an evil demon who forced me to write code. I do not remember the process, but when I was done, I had a procedural monster generator. If you thought you had gotten out of hearing how it works, I have terrible news for you. Each of the points has a chance of spawning either an eye or a mouth. They also have randomized sizes. I coded the eyes to follow the player, which took 5 minutes and was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. I then made it even more scary by adding random tentacles at the edges, which reached out towards you. At this point, I had monsters and the player done, but there was a horrible issue. The entire point of this game was for it to read your mind and know when you're scared, but how can a game read your mind? To explain this, I'm going to need you to think a bit. Imagine you're walking in the woods. Suddenly, you hear a stick break behind you. You spin around and shine your flashlight around, but there's nothing there. Spooked, you continue walking. Then you hear heavy breathing right next to you. You break into a run, but there's nowhere to go. Suddenly, you feel a cold tentacle on your shoulder. You turn on the light, and right there in front of you is a horrifying monster. Now think, at which points in this situation did you become more scared? There are a few easy answers. First, when you hear the stick break. Second, when you turn on the flashlight expecting to see some beast. Third, when you hear the breathing, and when you start running away. And finally, when you see the monster face to face. This system gave me a series of signals to code into the game, which would tell the AI when you are getting scared. I quickly added some simple sound effects which are quieter when you are farther away, as well as some ambience. At this point, the development began slowing down because the game was too scary to work on at night. Actually, I'm not trying to imply anything, but when I started to work on this game, I wasn't in therapy yet. The demons were now possessing me more and more frequently, and as their slave, I began programming the system for fear. I created a variable called fear, which has a minimum value of 0 and a maximum of 100. Your fear slowly goes down over time, but it gets a boost when you're sprinting, when you use the flashlight, when you hear a sound, and of course, when you see a monster. Naturally, the higher your fear is, the bigger and more gruesome the demons are. By now, I wasn't even trying to finish the game anymore. I was just trying to rush out a simple demo so it would all end. I wrote a quick placeholder story about a guy who is haunted by the death of his brother, and I created a quick tile set to build a map with. I then drew this beautifully horrific camper van for you to spawn next to. Now I was going to have to playtest it. I wrote my will and ran the project. It was surprisingly fun, but I could tell there was a lot of work to do. In fact, there wasn't even a game loop yet. However, my goal of making a quick prototype was complete. I made plans to finish the game with my brother in the future, and I checked the project off as done. And then it was over. The game was done and the demons were gone. But if you want the demons to leave you alone, you should click right here.